Well, now I have the mic, so I can speak. Hello, everyone. Today we are here talking about documentation. So a few words about myself. I came here from Berlin, from not sunny Berlin, into a very sunny country. I'm so happy to be here. I'm working as an engineering management manager at Strava in Berlin. Probably you all know Strava application. And I'm also a PyBerlin organizer. It's a very nice welcoming meetup. So if you are around in Berlin, please come. And I have around 11, maybe a bit more years in software development. I really love Python. Should I move? It wasn't Python. I really love Python. It was my first welcoming sort of language. I came from C++, and then when I started with Python, I fell in love with the language and the community. And especially in Berlin, it was so nice to feel supported with the community. And that's why I'm here, also sharing my experience over the years. Although I'm not writing much code, but I am suggesting to my teams about best practices, and one of them is documentation. So this is our talk today. And I would like to ask, please raise a hand if you do document your code. Oh, wow. So why are you here? Okay, probably you know everything. Let's see if you know the stuff that I'm going to share. So me 10 years ago was like this. I didn't think that documentation is very important. Especially when I started with Python, I was using a lot of documentation to learn, and I didn't document my code. So what happened? It was a new project we started. It was an automated framework that we wrote for LG Smart TV as a team of 10 people. And you know what? After a year, we didn't know how it works, which was fun. And that's when we learned the hard way that documentation is very important, not just the comments, but more on the documentation level that I will share later on. So why is documentation important? Probably that's why. One of the ideas is that people forget things, and that's why you need documentation to recall what's actually happening. Then the next one, people leave the code alone for some time. Even if you are a core contributor, you might leave for like, I don't know, a few months, and then something happens, and then you don't remember anything anymore. For example, I don't remember anything for like a previous week from my work when I took 2 days off, and then I forgot everything because the life is so intense. Well, I also have a baby, so you probably would not remember your code that you wrote like a year ago. And new people contribute to your code, especially if it's open source. It's very important to see how to contribute to the code, not only how it works, but also, well, a lot of information that is needed. And how to start with documentation. Well, I saw that all of you already have some documentation, so maybe this is not so important, but might be that you might start with some of the items that I'm going to share. All right. But we are here about to talk about documentation, how to actually have it up to date. First is that you need to choose the main source and the tool for documentation. The problem that I encountered in my experience was that the teams had too many tools. So they had documentation here and there, sometimes on Confluence, sometimes in Google Docs. I mean, those are good tools, don't get me wrong, but if you have multiple tools, not even one place, then you will not be able to find. And right now, a good thing is that we have AI, so we can already connect one tool or like multiple tools that you are aware of. This is a very important fact that you need to know where documentation is. You can connect them all into one place, and then you can have a very smart search. So this is something that we're doing right now in some of the teams. But actually, first you need to choose the tools that you want to use and how. And then make sure it's up to date, right? So you need to keep it up to date to be able to recall what you did. You need to also add this as a part of maybe every PR or every second PR. Would be nice to have it in the CI as well. And you need to build a team culture around documentation. It's not only about writing documentation, updating that, but also about reading documentation. Because if you have documentation still, there might be some person, you know, that person works and stays with the company for their whole sort of life. 5-10 years feels like a lifetime. And then people tend to just come to that person and ask, how do I do this? How do I do that? So what would I suggest you, if you are that person, is to just send them links, and at some point they will get annoyed, which is so true, it works like that. But actually, if you are the person who is asking those questions from that specific person, if you do have documentation in your company, maybe it's time to bring it up to date. If there's no documentation, maybe it's time to start with documentation, because that person is a very probably senior person within the team, and you're using their time to answer the questions, which is not ideal. Obviously, they can contribute so much more. So let's start with basics. I hope that I convinced you that documentation is important, but probably you already knew about this. This is the code that I took, for example. Very simple one. It has 2 functions. And it's not very clear what does it do. That's why we are going to look into them. So the first function is just not doing anything, it's just returning the message, and also not clear what does it do next, what should I do with the function. The next one, also not documented, and it has weird params. It does something, and maybe it doesn't do anything with them, you don't know. So how to add documentation to this code? There is some secret that I'm going to share with you. Maybe you already learned that. So there is a link. You can go and check more information. This is from Daniele Procida. He also gave the talk in, I think, was 2017. And it's awesome. It was just fantastic. I was so inspired by this talk. And I learned that not so many people probably watched that talk. Also, I didn't watch that talk. I found on internet that link also with different types of documentation. So one of the approaches that I'm going to share today is to add the how-to guides into your documentation. So we're going to talk about different types of documentation today, not only about the standard approach that you probably have seen, just add something, how it works, and then you're done. No, there are different approaches that you probably need to accommodate all of them for your code. So one of them is the how-to guides. It's the goal-oriented approach, and those are the guides to take the reader of the guide through some steps. So it's very important to focus on some work. For example, it's like a recipe. The direction that you go, you would see there. And for example, in the code that I shared, would be nice to have a README with some installation process. So there is always a goal to this piece of documentation. Like you start somewhere and then there is the certain end where you finish. Second approach is the learning-oriented approach. Those are the tutorials. So those are basically the lessons to learn stuff. So it doesn't have very specific goal, but the goal is to learn. So it doesn't mean that it would be like the full project, but it's for the reader to learn, for example, how to use that tool or how to contribute into your repo. And for our example, I wrote a tutorial on the basic setup of Sphinx, well, documentation. Next one is the explanation. This is understanding-oriented approach. So this approach will clarify a bit more information on the subject. It would also expand the information, so everything that is not included into the previous steps, something that you might need to add extra for people to know about your application or the code that you're writing. For example, it could be some advanced techniques. Why is this repo needed? Why is this tool useful? Can be something like that. So for example, I wrote the explanation of why documentation is needed. And the last but not least is the reference. So this is the information-oriented approach. It would have a code reference, so it would have aggregated all the doc strings that you might be already writing. from the code that you have, it would be nice to also describe the classes, the functions, the APIs that you have, to already see it up to date. So if you, for example, have it, but you don't store it as documentation, you can have it continuously updated. For example, if you add one of the checks to your CI, whenever somebody adds a piece of code, it should be documented. Very nice. And then it would fail if there is no documentation. Or if it's not possible, for example, it could be one of the checks for the code review within the team. And then the teammates would keep each other accountable about how to update the code, what should be updated, what type of documentation you need, and so on. So this is the code reference that I built. So I just added the doc strings into a very simple application, used Sphinx, and served it to read the docs, which was for free for open source. And also there is a paid-for solution for the companies. And here's the secret. In other words, we call documentation, what we call documentation is fundamentally not one thing, but four. Understanding the implication of this and how those four different things work can help improve most of documentation. This is the citate from the source that I link in there. And it's very nice to understand that documentation has different shapes and forms. It has different types. And the more you add, the more it becomes a full documentation. So it would be the code reference, also some README, some information that you can share with the reader. It could be also tutorials, some basic setup of the application. And it could be more explanation and the why of this project. And then, this is how I feel. Not always like that, because it's very hard to keep that up to date. So how to actually start? What I did for this project, I started very simple. So I went through all the layers and I added one by one, which was very useful and nice. Since it's an empty project, it doesn't have much. It was very easy to add. If the project is very big, probably you need to define the milestones, how to add documentation. And I would suggest you to go to version control documentation. For example, read the docs. It can also build documentation from the branches. It can build from like the different versions, different releases. And of course, if you can add doc strings to your code, not the comments. The comments is a bit different. So comments are for developers. It's very nice to have comments, but documentation is not only for developers, but for people to use the package. For example, if you are trying to use one of the packages and it doesn't work, where do you go? You go to documentation. You go to check README. You go to check some information, how to fix the projects, or then you go and contribute and fix the project, right? So those are different things. And if you have just doc strings, then as a developer, you would have to go through the whole code to understand how it works. That would be taking a lot of time. And you can use any of the tools to prepare documentation. I used Sphinx in my example. It was very nice, convenient for, well, many years. It was like 10 years ago when I started documentation. So you can also try some of the hosted solutions, like Read the Docs, GitHub Pages, well, anything that you think is more reasonable for you. There are lots of solutions. And of course, add more documentation on the top. So this is the code that I shared. There are some examples. There's also the CI setup. I also added some security checks. Also, there is a very nice tool which is called Interrogate, which goes through your code, and then it will tell you what is the coverage. You can put the maximum, well, minimum coverage to pass the CI. Also works. So this is how Read the Docs looks. There is a very nice setup, super easy. Not easy to install the things in there. So basically, if everything is installed in there, you can run it. For example, Jupyter notebooks, they just run, I think. I tried it last night. It did run. It was building very nicely, so you didn't need to install anything specific. You can install packages in there, Python packages, but if you need to install something specific, that would not work. That's what I had for this talk. So this is the example with some simple documentation. This is all I shared before. There is code reference. There are different pages. You can go through them as well. And more stuff that I wanted to share. So first idea was to add some interactive Python in there. Would be nice, right? You have some Python, you write the code, you execute it, and then you see the results in documentation. Maybe not needed, but fun. So what I tried, I saw a talk from Jeff Glass, I think it was 2024, and it was very nice. So it was so nice, so great, it works out of the box, and I tried it. Well, to be honest, I tried it this week, and it didn't work, and I was panicking. Okay, what do? It doesn't work at all. Then I saw that that project, so it's called Sphinx PyScript. It's supposed to add PyScript into your documentation. So you just install it, and then it works out of the box. It doesn't. It doesn't really work at all. So what I did, yeah. So this is the talk, PyScript documentation. You can check the talk as well. You can also search for it. It gives you an example of the PyScript. It works so nice. And this is the whole code of it. It's not so much. You just install the application, PyScript, and then it's supposed to work. This is the demo. Yeah, this is the application. So this is the package, Sphinx PyScript. But you can see it's 2 years, 3 years old. Quite old, right? And there is a PR open in here for the talk, not merged yet. So I tried to also install that PR, also didn't work. Well, great. So what do? I need to give a talk in a few days. I was panicking, it didn't work. I even tried to run the code, also didn't work. Well, I did something else. So this is the PyScript that was supposed to work, and it's just not there. Like you see, it was supposed to be there, it's not. The problem is that it doesn't render. So if you take, for example, the approach described on the official website, it just doesn't render properly. So it just shows you the code as a text, and that's it. If you use this one, it's pre-executed. So, well, I tried to find a different approach. You can also probably fork the code and then contribute yourself. This would be a solution, because PyScript is awesome. It would be nice also to have that little button to execute, like here. So this is from the talk, like you click in here and then it executes the code. You can also write in here and also double execute the code. This is what I wanted to have. Then I found another solution, Jupyter Notebook. For Sphinx, it was super easy. You just write your file with Jupyter Notebook, and then it renders it into your documentation. So it creates the HTML out of it, which is very nice. It works out of the box, but there is also a problem with this. I mean, don't get me wrong, it looks nice, but this is it. So this is what you have. This is the code. And this is the result. It's pre-executed, and there is no way to make it live, unfortunately. Everything that is in the Jupyter Notebook, it has to be pre-executed. There are some exceptions. So, for example, if there is a long execution, like you need to build some graphs, the idea is to disable the execution and then put all the graphs as pictures into your results. This is the idea of documentation. So basically, either you contribute to the previous project that I showed, PyScript, which would be running nicely, or you just take what you have. So it's not interactive. I'm not sure if you really need interactive for documentation. So it really works. It does what it should do. You have the piece of code. You see the results. I don't think that you actually need to write the code interactively, because otherwise you can install packages and then just run it. So I would choose this approach, to be honest, because another approach took quite a while to figure out, and it didn't work in the end. And almost end. Yeah, so it's super simple. For Jupyter Notebook, you just install, you add configuration, and then you add the file, enjoy, boom, done. Took 5 minutes. Beautiful. But there is a problem, right? You can force people to write documentation with all the tools, but you cannot force people to read documentation. And this should be the culture that you need to build within the teams. And that's it. Thank you.
We can just use this one. Oh, so Anastasia, how do you feel about documentation generated by AI? Any good tools to recommend?
Well, yes, and yes. So even doc strings, for example, you can put your code into ChatGPT and it would generate fantastic doc strings. It works pretty nicely. Awesome, fantastic, but security as well. If you work for a company, you cannot do that because then you share your whole code with some tools, right? So only if you have some solution that you're paying for and they cover the security, then you can use it. For example, some, I don't know, supporting tools, but we didn't use it, to be honest. Like there are so many problems in there. You explain what you need and then it gives you a different result. So there are lots of hallucinations in there in the tools. But if you need some simple things, you can use the chat as well. Well, up to you. I would not recommend security-wise, but yeah.
How do you conciliate keeping documentation updated with frequent daily, typically refactoring?
That's a tricky question. Team culture, I would say. So if you don't have that team culture, it would take a while for people to get used to it. If you add the tool that checks how many lines of code are documented, what is the percentage, then it would mandate people to document the things. You can also check that as a checkbox for the code review, but you cannot force people to actually do that. So I would rather start with the team, talk with the team, decide on the team basis that this is the tool. If it's some open source, then yeah, just some checks on the CI.
You say documentations are like food recipes. Do you remember the documentation you enjoyed most in your experience and why?
That's a very tricky question. Well, I enjoyed documentation about documentation from Daniele. This was the most enjoyable one because it has so much explanation in it and it's so clear to go through. But I think this was the best one I saw when I was preparing the talk. Yeah, there are lots of documentation. For example, AWS has a lot of documentation in there, and you can find anything that you're looking for. Sometimes for custom questions, you will not find any documentation which is good at. So it's also up to the taste, I would say.
So we still have room for questions. Do you have some awesome AI prompts for create documentation? Still about AI. What do you think about AI, which can pretty well document undocumented code? In this case, you don't need to spend time for documentation at all, or is it a good way to start?
Yeah, so for code reference, yes, you can use AI. For some very specific stuff, like explaining the why, I would say that you should do that rather than ask AI, because if you ask and then it it's hallucinating, then it can make up a lot of things. For example, I wanted to write documentation on like future of the project. It was in the previous company I worked for, and we had a strategy. So I asked AI, what is the strategy that you suggest for the company? And the answer was so great. I was like, oh my God, this is so close to reality. But here and there were some weird things that I would not say that this could be possible. And I asked our C-level, like, is this something that we could consider even? And like, no, this is technically impossible at all. It was about hardware, so I'm not a very hardware person. I was mostly for the software, so I had to ask product people as well. And it was very close. Like if you really look into the whole outcome, it's almost like you wrote it in the nice words. But it's still not. If you look into details, it would give you some weird answers, like literally it doesn't exist in the world and not possible. So if you want to use AI, if you want to use it as documentation tools, even for the calls, if you transcript everything, there is a nice summary in the end. And then summary, you need to check for sure. Like you cannot save it as it is. And sometimes it might take even more time to produce the proper documentation out of the results than you will be writing yourself. So it depends also on the code size.
What are your suggestions about the approach for a fully undocumented big project?
Oh. Please do documentation. Well, you already need to start yesterday, I would say. I would say that you need a strategy for that. I'm also all into strategy. You would need a roadmap. That would be a nice thing to do. So if it's a huge project, you need to define how do you start. So whether you start with different modules, like you split into different modules, whether you hire a person dedicated to the documentation, this would be a boring job, I would say, or maybe fun job, it depends. And it might take a lot of time. So if you want to just touch the pieces that you are developing on and then add on the top, you can also include that into the CI, because CI would tell you like, okay, this PR needs documentation here and there. Like as soon as you touch the file, it would just red light your PR that you need documentation here and there. But this is only for the code reference. For more advanced pieces of documentation, you need to define where you want to write everything, here or there. Like you need to choose the tool if you want to aggregate it all together or not. So yeah, you need a strategy for that, for sure.
Maybe the last question. Do you think that using more AI-generated code will change the documentation approach? Writing first, documentation first?
Well, probably not, I would say. It's like test-driven design. It doesn't work like that, to be honest. For documentation, you can write some papers, like this is the approach that we are going to use. And then it doesn't work like that. So like you even create a design document. This is the architecture that we are going to go. And then in a year, you would see it's way different that you said. For documentation of the code that is written by AI, it would just add doc strings out of the box. So that part is covered, but all the rest is not. So it's also up to you to make sure that AI tool has the request for you to write, like, oh, you need to write me this explanation of this way of, let's say, installation process. That could also work, but you also need to review that part.
That was the last question. Thank you, Anastasiia.